Hi, my name is Yvette Ortiz, and today I would like to discuss my lesson plan, first section 1, then 2 and 3. This lesson plan will be for grade 6. Subject is English Language Arts. Date of observation is July 9th, 2015. For the Common Core State Standards that I will cover in this lesson, it'll be CCSS.ELA-literacy.RL.6.7, and that is English Language Arts, Literacy, Reading Literature, Grade 6, Standard 7. Compare and contrast the experience of reading a story, drama, or poem to listening to or viewing an audio, video, or live version of the text, including contrasting what they see and hear when reading the text to what they perceive when they listen or watch. Now, what is my objective for students learning for this lesson? The students will be able to compare and contrast the experience of reading a text individually and the experience of engaging with a text as a listener. The student will be able to discuss and explain the effects of tone and imagery on their experience. The students will be able to explain in a journal entry their change in perception. Now, why have I chosen these objectives? I have chosen these objectives because they are a natural progression of previously learned material. Students' focus on literary components such as tone and imagery will create a foundation that students will use to explain their perception of the material in a group setting. Students will be able to read the selected short stories and practice reading internally and externally. Focusing on these objectives will guide students to close reading and examining their own reactions to the content of each story. These objectives are targeted toward growing the students' ability to discuss and explain the differences and similarities in their own experiences with those of their peers. With these objectives, I think it's important to focus on helping students reach the point where they can actually discuss their perceptions or their changes in perception. And by giving them a few key literary components to focus on, such as tone and imagery, they'll be able to start off with something to get them started in their discussion. Now for student grouping, how will I group students for instruction? Okay, we will begin the lesson with a short whole group discussion of literary components and to model the assigned task, which will help eliminate any misunderstandings or misconceptions on the material. Students will then be paired with their shoulder partners to read silently and discuss their initial reactions to the text. Students will then listen to an audio file of the same short story and will be divided into small groups to compare and contrast their reactions based on the introduction of an auditory component. A second story will be introduced and students will repeat the grouping cycle. To conclude the lesson, students will be assessed based on a short independent activity. Now, why have I chosen this grouping? I feel that this grouping is the most conducive to completing this lesson successfully and to attaining our objectives. I think it's a good form and the best progression for students to verbalize their reactions to the text. Students will be able to initially work with their shoulder partner to discuss one-on-one their reactions, and after listening to the audio, will be able to work with a small high-low group to discuss the similarities and differences as well as the literary elements that affect their reactions as they read and then listen. Allowing the class to finish their discussion as a whole group will allow for any gaps in an individual group's discussion to be addressed before continuing. By ending the lesson with an individual assignment, students will have the opportunity to organize their own thoughts in line with the class discussion and document their experience, resulting in a formative assessment to gauge comprehension. The grouping that I've chosen really has the focus of helping students attain the objectives successfully, but also gradually. They'll be building on the activities and on their grouping setup to reach the point where they'll be able to discuss their experiences with the whole class. Now, methods, instructional strategies. What teaching methods will I use for this lesson? The methods that I have chosen for this lesson are discussion, modeling, small group and partner activities, report back session, and independent evaluation. At the beginning of the lesson, students will have the opportunity to brainstorm literary elements that they can refer to and use in their discussion in comparison of their experience. The discussion will be targeted to link students' prior knowledge with the lesson and to help them develop higher level questions. I will model the activity and give students the opportunity to practice. Students will be assigned to small groups and partner for short activities. Students will end the lesson by reporting back and discussing their findings. Students will be evaluated individually. The Marzano high-yield strategies I will use in this lesson are cooperative learning and setting objectives and providing feedback. Now, why have I chosen these methods of instruction? Brainstorming at the beginning of the class will help students link previous knowledge with the lesson, as well as clearly outline objectives and clarify any possible misunderstandings. It'll help me guide the class in the direction that I want it to go and be able to make sure that students are reaching the right level of high order thinking questions that they need to reach in order to successfully complete this lesson. Modeling will allow for any questions regarding the objectives and activities to be clarified and will guide the fluidity of the lesson and group activities. By addressing any questions at the beginning, it will help keep the students on task and targeted without having the issue of misunderstandings hindering the lesson. Beginning with a partner activity that will allow students to voice their findings with one peer before having to discuss their experience with a small group and then the class as a whole will help to build up to the point where students will be able to discuss their reactions with the entire class, particularly for students who are not as vocal about their thoughts. I think it will be a good way to ease them into the final objective. Also, working initially with a peer and then a small group will give me the opportunity to provide immediate feedback as I observe their partner and group work. I'll be able to provide feedback on the tasks that they're working on. If any groups fall behind or deviate from the target of the discussion, I'll be able to help them get back on task. And for students who are more advanced and perhaps need to be nudged into yet another question, I'll be able to do that for them so that they can perhaps approach the lesson in a different manner and increase their response. Now, a gradual progression to whole class discussion will help lower level students build confidence in their responses and facilitate whole class discussion for the report back session. The report back session will allow the students to voice any questions and discuss any gaps in small group discussions. I think the report back session is a great way for students to demonstrate what they're taking away from the lesson. It's a great way for me to be able to gauge their learning and their perception of what they've read, which is one of the objectives of the lesson. So by reporting back, any gaps in discussion or any last minute questions can be addressed before moving on to the individual assessment. And the individual assessment will allow for further feedback and follow up for individuals or for the entire class as needed.